Hey everybody, before we start the show, I just wanted to let you know about an amazing game supplement now available on the DMs Guild that I was a part of. It's called Encounters in the Savage Cities, and it is an amazing collection of ready-to-go 5th edition D&D encounters for you to drop right into any city game. There's 26 encounters. It's a mix of combat and intrigue and exploration and interaction. It is awesome. It's put together by the amazing friend of the show, Jeff C. Stevens. It's got lots of names you should recognize. I'm talking about Gene Headley. I'm talking about Chris Bissett. I'm talking about M.T. Black. Maybe you heard of that guy. I'm talking about Ken Carcass. I'm talking about Phil Beckwith. I'm talking about Sarah Lucas. I'm talking about Alex Klippinger. Listen, there's a ton of names of people who have produced amazing content. Many of them are already bestsellers on the DMs Guild. This is something you can't miss. It's got amazing maps from the Any award-winning website Elven Tower. It's got incredible art. It's got all kinds of goodness. Buy this. You will be ready to go. Head on over to the DMs Guild and search for Encounters in the Savage Cities. That's right. Encounters in the Savage Cities. Go check it out. I even have an encounter myself as part of this thing. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, we are going supersized. We've got two amazing topics. First up is a chat about White Wolf role-playing games. I wasn't super familiar with the system, and then someone you all might know, Sage Stafford of the Venture Maidens, suggests we talk about it on the show and I get an education. Chris from the Twin Cities by Night podcast, which is an amazing White Wolf actual play podcast, and Paul Harpring, who is, among many other things, a Venture Maidens guest and a White Wolf aficionado. Then, after that, I am talking with Jason Nelson of Legendary Games about his new Kickstarter for the Alien Bestiary for 5th edition, and for Pathfinder, and for Starfinder. We do a ton of deep dives into why Sci-Fi is having a resurgence in the role-playing game world right now, and it is a great conversation. I can't wait to play these for you, so here we go, White Wolf Convo. Okay, everybody, now I am here with three amazing people, and I'm excited to introduce them to you. Of course, with me is Sage Stafford of the Venture Maidens podcast. Sage, who are you, and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Oh man, I hope you guys haven't gotten sick of me yet. I think this has been the third time I've been with you.
It's a pleasure every single time. So you can come back anytime. You might be here when I'm not one day. So there you go.
Watch out, I'm coming for your job. So yes, as many of you might know, I play Cara Brynhilda, the very classy barbarian on the Venture Maidens, very active on Twitter about tabletop role-playing. I also run a Mage the Ascension game for my friends every weekend. I've been playing tabletop role-playing games for 4 years now. That's pretty much it.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you. I always find your insights are just deep and lovely, but also stated in a way that the common man like me can understand, which is much appreciated.
Perfect. It's what I strive for.
And also, I believe sharing the mic with you, Sage, is Paul Harpring. Paul, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
I'm a bonus content producer for Venture Maidens, as well as the voice of their narrator. I had my debut on their show as a NPC, Montgomery, their last couple episodes. So if anybody wants to see what I'm like at the table, they can check that out. I've been playing tabletop games off and on for close to 20 years now, honestly. And I actually got my feet wet really in the tabletop scene playing World of Darkness games.
It's very, very great to have you here, and people should definitely go listen to Paul's episode on the Venture Maidens, as they should listen to all episodes of the Venture Maidens, because it's an excellent podcast. And, of course, last but not least with us is Chris Zacher. Chris, welcome to Tabletop Apple. Who are you, and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah, I kind of wear two hats. First, I'm kind of a poser compared to the history and the experience that you guys have. I played for a couple of years.
No such thing.
I played for a couple of years, White Wolf games from like 99 to 2001, and then I recently just picked it up a little bit over a year ago again. I run a YouTube channel / podcast called Twin Seas by Night, where we play different White Wolf games, World of Darkness games on there. And then I also have a Facebook group that I run called White Wolf RPGs, Gameplay and Media, where basically it's for content creators to share, like, you know, their either media dealing with White Wolf games or gameplay, and for people to view it and everything like that, just kind of like a forum for be able to share their stuff like that.
That's excellent. Well, thank you all for being here. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today, especially about White Wolf games. We were talking before we started recording, and I have to admit, I am not as familiar with White Wolf's role-playing games as I would like to be, mostly because I never had other people in my life who played them to introduce me to these games. But I am super interested in them, and I do want to play them. I feel like a poser. And I've heard amazing things about White Wolf games. From the time I was a young lad playing Dungeons and Dragons, people would be like, well, you know, you want to play a real good role-playing game, you should play some of these White Wolf games. You should check out, Vampire the Masquerade, right? Vampire Requiem, World of Darkness was mentioned. But there's a lot of RPGs that are a part of this system. Changeling, I believe, right? And please correct me if I'm getting anything wrong here. And many of these games have had many editions and things like that. So I'm going to throw it out to you all. And Chris, why don't we actually start with you, since you mentioned how much you love this system. What makes White Wolf role-playing games White Wolf role-playing games? Like, what is it that this is a game that belongs to this company? What is it that makes it that? If I may be so vague as to ask that question.
Oh, no. Actually, it's a good question, because I feel what makes White Wolf games is their concept of the World of Darkness, where basically what the World of Darkness is that it's very similar to the world that we all live in, a little bit darker, a little bit more dreary, and you add different elements of these different games that they have. Now you have kind of two World of Darkness lines. You have the old World of Darkness, which was what White Wolf started originally, and then you had where they kind of did a reboot in a way, and they had what they called at one point the New World of Darkness, but is now called Chronicles of Darkness. But that's what it is. That's what makes White Wolf awesome in my eyes. It's grounded in reality, as grounded as you can get, in a role-playing game, and it allows, I think, very organic stories, like realistic stories that can really scratch that creative itch. At least for me, and the type of stories I like to tell, and that I feel sometimes and that you can't quite maybe tell in certain game lines, like fantasy game lines.
That's really interesting, because Sage, the last time you were on, we sort of talked about how do we bring up heavy real world issues at the table, and how do we tackle that? Do you agree with this assessment that this is one of White Wolf's strengths? They're able to tackle the real world and real issues a little bit better than other systems. And also, what is it to you that makes a White Wolf game a White Wolf game?
I definitely agree. So when I was planning my campaign, I was debating. I was like, I could do a D&D 5th ed game with the alternate rules that I could set it in a normal modern day times. Wizards has produced rules for that. And I was like, or I was actually very fortunate to play as a player in a mage game that Paul started running. And that really opened my eyes to the World of Darkness. And I completely agree. Like, the way that the reality is portrayed, it just makes it so easy to get so caught up in a storyline, to be just absolutely enraptured. And I believe because, White Wolf games, they're not centered to be like a quest-based game. You're not going and fetching something and bringing it back to, the governor of the town. You have real problems that you're facing. Your character is a hoodlum on the street, like trying to, gather change to, get their next hit. I believe that because it is like so based in like, it's really, I think what makes a White Wolf game is that it is always a story about the human condition first and foremost. And whatever setting that you choose to put that in is up to you. The system has this amazing flexibility that I feel like other RPGs don't.
That's great. And it sounds like it's designed with that purpose in mind from the way you guys are talking about it, which is excellent. To have such a strong IP, and I do think that White Wolf games have a very, very strong sort of intellectual property presence. Only really maybe D&D and Paizo might have stronger IPs in the sense that they've got more money to sort of shove them in your face, right? Which speaks volumes then about this world. Paul, what do you think? What makes a White Wolf game a White Wolf game? Do you agree with our other two panelists?
Absolutely. The fact that it is based in reality and in a number of the source books, you have an entire alternate history, or rather supplemental history. So they're taking real-world events, and then depending on which system you're playing with, will add the vampiric element over top of it, or the werewolf element, or the mage, etc. So in a sense, you can actually learn a little bit about history. You may see something in a book and say, okay, well, this is what they're saying, but I know that this was actually a real-world event. So let me go explore the real world a little bit more and find out what was happening at that time, and then how the supernatural elements then get blended into real world history as well as modern times. To bring up something else about White Wolf games, not just the setting, but the mechanics of it was something that really drew me into it. I had been exposed to, I believe it was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, before I started playing White Wolf games. And the system just seemed incredibly opaque and obtuse. And it was really hard for me to get a handle on things like THAC0 and other concepts like that. And so then when I looked at a White Wolf, a character sheet for Werewolf the Apocalypse, which was the first game that I played, and it was just dots on a character sheet. When you want to do something, you pick up as many 10-sided dice as there are dots in your dexterity and your athletics, for example, and then you roll them and you have to hit a certain number. So it was far less table intensive, and it just seemed a lot more intuitive for me to pick up as a new player.
That's a good point. It actually reminds me of like my, if you were to ask me my overall thing, like name your favorite thing about White Wolf World of Darkness, is the simplicity of telling a horror story. I don't know if you two would agree, but it's a perfect canvas to tell a horror story. Now, mind you, there's like different genres in horror and everything like that, but it gives you the most simplified thing. And even in like a lot of the horror books, it has what's called the storyteller rule. So if you don't want to use something in this book and you want to throw it out, go ahead and throw it out, because the main concept is to tell a story with your peers that you have there. Like they even call it like a troupe, like an acting troupe, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I definitely think, to build on that, one of the things that is always present in their books is the storyteller isn't this, typically portrayed like dungeon master who's like guiding you down like through these paths of horror and they're controlling the story. You're not a dungeon master. You're not, trying to like push your characters to and fro. They specifically use the term storyteller because you are guiding the story along. You are helping your players along. Your players are helping you build the story and populate it and make this world bright and huge and vast. And you, as a storyteller, you help with rules. You make calls when you need to make calls. But, you're not like the puppeteer plucking strings by any stretch of the imagination. I think that's also what makes it have a more realistic vibe, because your characters can make really organic choices.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially if you have a good chemistry too. Like, I mean, there's sometimes when I'm like running a game, like I'm setting a scene or I'm interacting, but there's sometimes where I just sitting back and I'm watching like interaction between the players who are having a conversation. I actually one of the best hours of a game I remember is where I was hardly involved. I was just kind of like filling in where I needed to fill in, but it was totally being ran by the players themselves, and it was really impactful and great dialogue. And it was something that I think that I assume isn't seen that much in like kind of like the D&D Pathfinders, Shadowrun type games, at least that I've heard from people who play it, you know.
Yeah, that reminded me actually of a session I played in a Mage the Ascension game that ran for quite a long time, about 3 years. And we all got so comfortable with each other that there was a session where I think literally almost half of it was taken up just by our characters making breakfast and deciding to do that day. We were all so invested in our characters and in the world at that point that we could have, a 2-hour-long scene over what each one of us is having for breakfast.
That's
Yeah, and they build upon that, especially like they have in their new World of Darkness / Chronicles of Darkness, the core game is a game called Chronicles of Darkness that deals with being immortal in the World of Darkness, just being a normal person, average day person. I actually ran a Chronicle that went 6 sessions. It was just mortals, and it was so fun. It was so crazy. You know what I mean? Like it was a blast, and no supernatural powers, no nothing like that. It was just 4 folks trying to figure something out together, and that was pretty cool to see.
So I want to hit you guys with some questions real quickly, just so we can define terms for people like me, because I think that there's some stuff as role players I understand just enough to be dangerous in this conversation. So you've mentioned the World of Darkness a couple times. Do all of the White Wolf games take place in the World of Darkness, or is that one specific White Wolf game?
All the games licenses that are owned by White Wolf right now all take place in the World of Darkness. White Wolf kind of has a storied history with ownership going back and forth, and there's a group called Onyx Path who kind of had the licenses and were pushing out new material and continue to do for the time being, but they have license to a couple of games that White Wolf had created, one being Exalted, another called Scion, that really never fell into the World of Darkness in itself. And they kind of aimed more to using the storyteller system, but more, I believe, for like a fantasy / sci-fi.
Adventure was one of those as well.
Adventure, yeah.
Street Fighter 2. Pulp action, yeah.
Okay, all right, that's great. So are they all taking place at the same time, or are they different time periods within the World of Darkness, the various game properties?
They all coexist within the World of Darkness. And then there was a period of time where they were releasing time-specific versions of the game. So instead of Vampire the Masquerade, you had Vampire Dark Ages. So it was specifically set in that time period. They also did a Werewolf Wild West version. So they provided historic material specifically set for that time period and how it related to the factions of werewolves or vampires, some of which was the same as modern day, much of was different, or you could see the sort of evolution that a particular group was undergoing over the course of history within the timeline.
And they make it to where you can always run one too in the past. You know what I mean? And just kind of do your own thing with it, too, which is awesome. So.
Sure. Yeah, the encouragement to throw out anything you don't like is a great thing in any role-playing game. The encouragement, and I've seen this shift in D&D over the years, of whoever is your game master or running the game to be more like a referee than to be like a god, I think is also a very encouraging and good for storytelling sort of facilitating thing. And you can see the difference just across all of the various iterations of the Dungeon Master's Guide that
totally
D&D is starting to head that way, although they're not quite where a lot of other games are with that yet, as far as their own language and encouragement of that is, which is interesting because that's a very D&D thing, right? The DM still maintains a lot of power. So
that they've added that flexibility is one of the reasons why I enjoy 5th Ed more than, because I dabbled in some previous editions, like I mentioned, but 5th Ed really sort of captured my attention. They added a lot of flexibility to the system, and they've sort of like you just said, James, downplayed the god-like power of the DM. And though it's still there, it is more of a storytelling facilitator, referee kind of role.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard them talking about writing adventures. Chris Perkins, who is sort of their resident story director, was talking about how when he writes an adventure, he thinks about it as making a cup to hold the water of the story, that the players are going to create, which I think is also a good way to kind of approach storytelling and being a storyteller or being a referee or game master, right? That you're there to sort of help facilitate things and decide how the world reacts to these people, but they're the ones who are driving it, right? They're the ones who are sort of making anything of substance happen, which is great. Are all White Wolf games horror games? They appear to mostly be, and given the name World of Darkness, one might assume that.
Yeah. I think there are different types of horror. I'd say they're all horror in one form or an element. Like each game, I would say, has like specific type of horror. Like they're probably their most popular line, and I think Sage and Paul would both agree that like Vampire the Masquerade was the game that really got them into like, you know what I mean, in the public view. And that game, the big horror aspect is what they call personal horror, dealing with like this inner beast in you that sometimes you won't be able to control, having to try to pretend that you're still part of society. Werewolf has like a really kind of like the original Werewolf, the Apocalypse kind of have like really like a ecology kind of horror, you know what I mean? Like fighting the horror, like worm. They call it the worm, like corruption and everything like that. I think Mage is horrific, and I know you run Mage. And like the concept of Mage to me is scary because it's. I know I sound like a kid. It's scary because it's like these are normal people who are capable of doing amazing things, but it's like what they think is great for the world. They want to change the world to what they think is good. And we know how that can be for some people. You know what I mean? So you imagine they all have their own different types of horror, which is awesome. And you can even tweak each game to kind of change the perception of horror, what you want. Like I've seen people run Vampire different ways. I prefer to run it more lower level, personal horror kind of aspects. Some people like to run different types of horror. But yeah, I would say that they all have their own unique form of horror, and they all deal with horror in one way or another. So,
definitely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Horror, darkness is definitely a common thread throughout all of the games. That being said, there's a different element to it, and then that horror. So, Changeling, for example, it's more the horror of sort of wonder and imagination dying out. The players in that setting are these fey creatures who are just struggling to exist in this banal modern world. And so that's the horror that's oppressing. And that kind of thread can run through some Mage games too, where you have characters that have these miraculous capabilities, but at the same time, the world itself is crushing them down and constraining them and constraining humanity in general to not appreciate the possibilities of that are actually inherent within their existence.
Yeah, like have you ever read any Clive Barker before, James, or like anything like that? Like you could run, like there's so many games that I've played in or seen people run that remind me very like Clive Barker, Stephen King. You know what I mean? That kind of like it's really easy to get that theme and that feeling across in World of Darkness, White Wolf games.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very eerie. Eerie is a good word I like to use.
Yeah,
definitely. And I think because kind of inherent in character creation, like when you realize that you are a werewolf, when you change to a vampire, when you awaken and realize that you're a mage, something like psychologically traumatic usually has to happen to you or happens as a result of that. And it's a lot of this like personal trauma and like grit and all of these, trials and tribulations that, that these characters go through that helps like populate this world of darkness, that acknowledging all of these dark themes that are inherent, in all of us in one way or another. And like, like the Mage game that I'm running, like I'm running it as very much like a kind of murder mystery where, you know, they're picking up like these clues and, you know, these threads are starting to come together. And, you know, I really feel like it's up to the storyteller and how they choose to weave together their characters' backgrounds to make this mystery or horror.
Which I appreciate a lot about the World of Darkness systems is that they really sort of hammer in that point in the character creation process that Sage was just mentioning that really, I think, leads you to think more about the character that you're building and their history rather than saying, I'm going to play a half-orc urchin, barbarian.
Right,
you know,
right.
You kind of have to... You have to think about the evolution of that person's life a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like if you're blessed enough to get players that are really about playing character-driven characters, you know, and you pitch them an idea, because this is usually how it goes about. Like our group, I'll be like, or either me or someone else in our group will be like, hey, I'm thinking about running a Vampire the Masquerade game that's set in this time, in this place. I'm thinking it's going to have this kind of theme and feel. And man, when you see like good players who are just like, you can see them turning, they're not thinking like, I want to play Orc Barbarian or something like that. They're thinking like, I want to play a guy who is like 80 years old and almost gave up on life. And you know what I mean? They start brainstorming with each other. It's just really an amazing thing to see.
It's true. And I think when the focus becomes storytelling and maybe not killing monsters and taking their stuff, you do get a lot more interesting characters, right? Rather than thinking about, well, I'm going to be a barbarian, so I'll be a half-orc so that I'm the most indestructible and I can hit the hardest. You sort of get these, okay, what's going to be the most fun for me? What's going to be the most interesting? What can I bring that my friends haven't seen before to the table? You know, how do I go beyond the tropes? I think is one thing that I always try to do, no matter what game I'm playing. It's like, how can I tilt this half-orc barbarian on its head? And it sounds like World of Darkness and White Wolf games sort of allow for that to happen. Especially, I think right off the bat, one thing that makes it different is you are playing a werewolf or a vampire or a mage. I guess we should say, right, means something very different in the World of Darkness, right?
Right.
People who have magic are not welcomed with open arms, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. You're walking down the street and you saw someone cast Fireball, you'd be like, holy what the
and they would have ramifications for doing that in the middle of the street.
That mage would take some serious penalties. If you were walking down the street and you saw a werewolf, like human people like literally go mad if they see a werewolf in their like true form, like. There are ramifications.
So right off the bat, we've got this different story in the game, which is awesome and like makes me want to go out and play it, because I'm like, I want to play things from this side. I want to understand what it's like to wake up and be Strahd and not just try to kill Strahd. Right?
Totally.
Yeah. So my question is, do a lot of these games end tragically, as far as the stories go, not as far as like player relationships go? Like, is there an expectation built into the game of maybe a little bit more inter-party conflict, or that, maybe your character isn't exactly going to end the game sitting on a pile of treasure drinking with their friends? Like, is there that kind of expectation to it, given that it is a horror game and you are playing monsters?
Totally, yeah. I mean, the whole, like, for example, Vampire the Masquerade, the whole concept of the game is there's a trait called humanity. The higher your humanity, the more you can kind of pass for human. The lower your humanity, the more you're losing grip with your humanity, and you start becoming more the monster in a way. The more that you become the monster, the more at risk you can break what's called the masquerade. Like in vampire game, they have a thing called the masquerade, where it's pretend that we're human. Don't let humans know about us, because when humans find out about us, something like the Spanish Inquisition can happen, and they'll just outnumber us and kill us. And we've learned our lesson, so let's just kind of, you know what I mean, hide in the shadows and not give away our existence. And I found especially in the vampire games that I run on our channel, that a lot of the players have embraced that. You know what I mean? Like you said, it's not about sitting on a pile of gold or magical axe +5 or whatever you got from slaying some bugbear dragon. Or I'm just joking around, but seriously, it's about the character arc and the arc that you're taking the character. You know, like one of the things, and I'm sure the people who play in our group are going to listen to this, but one of the things that really impressed me that I've seen from a player was there was this guy named Alex. He's from New Zealand. He played this female vampire called Ophelia, and he did a really good, tasteful job.
She's my favorite.
Oh, are you listening? Okay, I don't want to spoil it. Have you listened to all of it? Because I don't want to say what I'm about to say if you haven't. So
it's okay. It's okay. I've listened to it.
He's really good at, and he's really tasteful, and he's really about it. But the whole thing about this Ophelia character is that she's someone who's trying to cling to her humanity, where kind of like the rest of the group isn't as much. But she also has this really like kind of sinister way of not doing bad things, but like messing with people's emotions, which any human can do. You know what I mean? Someone who's kind of a little manipulative. But the player told me in the middle of our second arc, he said, "Hey, I'm just giving you this option out here. I don't want to know how you do it. I don't want to have any forewarning that you're going to do it. But if you want to use my character and kill the character to progress your story in any way, I'm 100% for it." And he's like, it's not that I'm tired of playing the character. I love playing the character. But he felt that would be the perfect way to close this arc of like kind of like a naive vampire who wasn't really wanting to, was fighting hard not to accept what it was. And then just like that naivety, like just being the end of the character, you know? And so I went and did that. And I'm not going to say how for people who haven't listened, but I was like blown away. Because I mean, really, would you ever see someone like, I want you to kill my 10th level cleric I've spent X amount of time working on just so you can make our story better. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something I think that you see too many in games. I think that kind of, you may see that more in World of Darkness games because players want to progress the story in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. The mage game that I was referencing earlier, we did have, there were some character deaths here and there, but it was always about what's going to be better for the story. How is the story of the world essentially going to evolve? You're really co-creating the entire universe. If you're playing World of Darkness, you have that source material, but because it's the real world, I think your players have more knowledge to draw from in how they can manipulate the world around them. Do they want to open a business? Well, what kind of business do they want to open? It's the real world. So you can pull upon, all of the examples you have from your real life rather than trying to imagine what kind of business could be created in a high fantasy setting by a half-orc barbarian. Just keep rolling with that.
Which is extra hard because he probably can't read.
Yeah. Not going to be too good at bookkeeping.
And you mentioned a cool thing. You were asked about like inter-party conflict, and that does occur in games because the games, not like in a PvP kind of way, but more in that these games are very based off society, like little niches in society, right? You have like, for mages or werewolves or vampires, you have different groups. Like they call them clans and vampire. They call them tribes and werewolf. They call them traditions and mage. And each of these traditions have their own belief, and each of these traditions may have conflict or history, bad or good history with different ones in their past. And all these players that you're going to have, they're going to choose people of certain traditions that you allow in the game. And so there's some stereotypes to it that kind of get cliche after a while. But if you have creative players, they find interesting ways to kind of introduce that. So you're going to kind of have, and then normal personalities. I mean, if you threw all four of us and another stranger in the middle of the street and you said, figure something out, you know what I mean? How does that usually go in real life? You know what I mean? There's a, there's a feeling period. There's a We learn how people talk, who's the alpha or whatever. And that's what's awesome about World of Darkness. It's not like you're the cleric, so you stand back there and you heal us, and you're the wizard, so you guys stand back there and magic missile, or you know what I mean? And I'm using my very limited D&D knowledge here. But,
you're pretty much spot on. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're the powerful barbarian to kick down that door and get our gold. And, but the thing that's funny is that, and I'm sure Sage and Paul remember this, White Wolf kind of went that direction like in 2000, 2001, 2002. The people often jokingly call it the katana and trench coat phase. That's what our group calls it. I've heard like trench coat ninja used by a couple other people, where like White Wolf and like in what they call the revised edition. Now, mind you, there was a good portion of it that was like story, but you kind of saw like this when Blade was coming out, you know what I mean? And stuff like that, and everyone's like, want to wear sunglasses indoors and have dual silver katanas. That came out in the history of it, but nowadays I think most of the time people usually, and not to knock, people want to play the game that way, but I think most of the time you see people who don't really kind of aim for that, but it's kind of a joke, that's a katana trench coat character, right?
Sure. Just like how the world lends itself to, all of the games lend themselves to a sense of horror. They definitely lend themselves to those kind of tropes where it's easy to make a character that's like that. I mean, I remember the first vampire character I made when I was like 13 or 14. And it was trenchcoat ninja. Like, it happened.
It's like you get it done within your past, you learn from it. As long as you don't keep doing it after your 20s, you're good to go. Right?
Well, and I think we're poking a lot of fun at D&D, right? But I love D&D, and we all know Sage plays D&D all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And we have records here we can go back and listen to.
It's an amazing game.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah. And it started all of this. So I think, and people can tell great stories with that as well. Like, I just want to, for the listeners, let them know, obviously, D&D is a great game. We love it. But I do think that different games, different role-playing games in particular, do different things. And it's when that game starts to stray off the path too quickly, for instance, going through a katana and leather jacket phase, right? That makes all of the people who came to White Wolf for a specific reason say, well, why am I playing this game? Because there were already other games I could go have a katana and trench coat in, right? I think it's the same thing with D&D, from the 4th edition days of D&D. I think a lot of people felt that they could get that experience somewhere else, and they came to D&D for a different thing. I definitely feel what you all are saying about this, because a good horror game can be very, very tough to do, and a good horror game that plays on real-world themes the way horror stories do, the way horror stories often should, and can relate to real life, and also allows you to have a level of inter-party conflict, but that, like, at the end, we're all friends. We're not, like, attacking each other, right? And outside of the game, the players are not mad at each other. Sounds like a really fun, amazing thing. And I want to go to there. So, do you think... Oh, actually, wait. Before we get to this, what is the difference between Vampire the Masquerade and Vampire the Requiem?
So basically what happened is that through especially like the second and revised edition of a lot of the core White Wolf games from like the 90s and early 2000s, like we're talking about Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage Ascension, Wraith of Oblivion, Hunter the Vigil, and Changeling the Dreaming, there was always this end of the world theme, right? Like the end of the world's coming. Especially in Vampire and Mage and Werewolf, the revised editions in the early 2000s, it was like Gehenna is coming, the end of the world is coming, and they were building up, and finally, I guess they had to, like, for lack of a better term, poop or get off the pot with it, right? They kept hinting at it. Exactly. Yeah, so they did it. They said they came out with these books. They said this is how we're ending the games, and the games got ended. And they really stuck to their guns. And then next thing you know, they introduced a couple years later these new line of games. And what they originally did was introduce one book called World of Darkness. And it was a book how to play Immortal in the World of Darkness. It was a brand new World of Darkness. None of those other games existed anymore. And then slowly they released like Vampire the Requiem, Werewolf the Forsaken, Mage the Awakening, and these new games. The difference between Vampire the Masquerade and the Vampire the Queen is that basically there's a lot of history and lore and Vampire the Masquerade. Like Paul mentioned, like the Carthage, the sacking of Carthage, and that Cain was the first vampire, and that there's been vampires all throughout the history of the man. Where Vampire the Queen was more of a street level, small level, and there was like no history. It was like things were not no history, but it was very like unknown. You know what I mean? All these big like meta canon questions no longer existed. It more focused on running like a game set in one city that you chose, and they kind of redid things to make it more focused on horror. I think they're trying to rein in the katana and the trench coat that started existing towards the end of Vampire, and they're trying to bring it back to the horror of the game, and which I respect. And recently, believe it or not, like I didn't, not for a lack of being stubborn or edition war or anything. It was just because when I played the first time, all I knew was Masquerade. All these new games didn't exist. And then when I started running games again a year ago, a couple of my players were like, man, you got to read this new World of Darkness stuff. You literally got to read it. And so I read Chronicles of Darkness or World of Darkness, that first book, and I like a week later said, I'm running a game in this. And I just fell in love with it. And they each have their strengths, definitely, but it's definitely not as canon-y. I guess that's an adjective when it comes to those games.
Kind of a good analogy that would be for like people who like play D&D. It's like 3.5 was so big, it had so much lore, there was so much going on. The settings were so big. Like if you were to think about if in transitioning from 3.5 to 5th Ed, between those two editions, like the Forgotten Realms are largely, or like all of the realms are really largely the same. Each edition picks out different things that they are trying to highlight. If it were written more like a White Wolf game, like the Forgotten Realms would have like had a nuke dropped on them, and then in 5th Ed it would be like what is living in the Forgotten Realms like after this terrible event happened, so it's like this like huge transition in the theme, and it's kind of like the life after.
And it cuts down on a lot of the source book bloat. To reference D&D 3.5 again, at the end they were coming out with all kinds of books, and if you were combining feats from all of the different books, I just saw a thread on Twitter the other day about how to create a 240 mile wide nuke using this particular feat chain that a sorcerer could pull off at like level 12. And so the original World of Darkness, the old World of Darkness, I think that's kind of, they were trying to wrap it all up. They were trying to end that world arc that they had been building for 10, 15 years at that point, and trying to give all of their players who had been following along and reading the fiction that was included in all of the source books, give it an ending, put a nice neat bow on all of it, and then release something new to say, okay, now we're going forward, this is what we're pushing, and it's a slightly different vibe.
Okay, I like that. I like a lot about that, and it's interesting because 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, right, is doing some of those things. They've cut down on their own source book bloat. They're trying to make some of their worlds more accessible by saying, like, we're not going to give you too much lore in this edition. We're just going to tell you things have changed so that you can change them then however you want at your table. So what advice would you give to me as a player and as a game master if I was going to sit down and either play or be the storyteller for a White Wolf game? And Sage, let's start with you on this one.
And definitely in terms of being a storyteller, like, think of something that you are really naturally passionate about. Like, for me, one of my big inspirations is like a passion for social justice. And I thought, how do I make a game about that? And then once you start from that like nugget, the world builds itself. You're like, you start to think, oh, this would be the perfect time. This would be the perfect setting. And it immediately just starts to blossom in your mind when you just start with, like a very, something that you're very passionate about, something that you would write a book about. I'm the kind of storyteller where I have like 15 pages of notes. And I know not all storytellers are like that. But I've like definitely for being a storyteller, I think starting with that thing that you're most passionate about is really important. For making characters, depending on how much of the world has been like explained to me or what the vibe that the storyteller is going for, of trying to find something that you really vibe with and really highlighting that and running with it. My favorite character to this day is a shaman from Peru named Guillermo Alpaca Llama Shaman who walked from Peru to San Francisco and opened up a store in Berkeley to sell like his trinkets to like white Berkeley people. Because they knew they would like totally eat that up. You find something about the world that you really love and just run with it. And then being able to bounce off with your storyteller with your ideas is also incredibly helpful. It is incredibly important for fleshing out your character.
Nice. That's great advice. I am glad I am recording this so that I have all of it to listen to. What about you, Paul? What are some advice you would give to new players or storytellers?
The first thing would be to, rather than, I guess, focus on the world of darkness as a whole, look at what particular setting you're going with, whether you're going with mage or whether you're going with vampire or werewolf or changeling or wraith. They all have certain themes within them. And so don't worry if you're going to run a mage game, don't worry about werewolf. Don't worry about vampire. If you want to throw vampires and werewolves in there, that's fine, figure it out, but focus on, I guess, the world that is kind of provided to you in Mage, whatever setting you're going with, because that helps you kind of rein it in, and it can also help you decide kind of what kind of story you're going for. If you want to tell a more ecological horror story of pollution and deforestation, werewolf is going to be a great setting and system to use for that. If you really want to deal with the struggles of humanity and trying to maintain the best aspects of yourself, vampire is going to be perfect for that. So they each have some themes running through them, and I would say focus on the one that you want to run, and don't worry about the greater world of darkness, I guess you'd say. And then when it comes to playing, check out, there's so many, looking at the different traditions in Mage, for example, they all have so many little tidbits within them that you can really just you can seize onto a tiny aspect, and then you try to tell the story of a person's life leading up to a point, getting back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. And that's how you build your character. And then once you have an idea of who that person is, the dots on the sheet and the nature and the demeanor, all the other mechanics will just they just fall into place once you have an idea of who this person is.
Totally.
I like that. Let the story lead is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
What about you, Chris? What advice do you have for people just getting into the game?
Amen, by the way, about not crossing over games like that. So that's a really good point.
We get messy.
Yeah, it gets messy. For storyteller, what's awesome about World of Darkness games, at least what I like about it, is that A, I can take outside inspirations, and B, I can take little segments of just like couple sentences you read in a paragraph from one of the books, and your mind can you can make a story around it, right? My first Vampire the Masquerade arc that I have on our channel was totally inspired by reading a book called Ghoul's Fatal Addiction, and by reading a book called Revelations of the Dark Mother, and just a couple lines in there, and I was just like, and I had this story that just started being created in my head. So take a little aspect. There's so many pages in so many of these books, right? A lot of people think they got to run the big, like, I got to have a Camarilla versus Sabat, which are two factions in Vampire the Masquerade. I got to have a game where they're going against each other. You don't feel like you have to tell those big stories. Just take a little aspect and delve on it. Just expand it and run with it. And that's what's fun. It's all about the story first, and make sure you have players who are invested in your game. I can't stress that enough. I'm sure we've all, in one form or game or another, have had to deal with like toxic players or someone who probably wasn't fully invested in the game. It's really like a damper, right? When you try to tell a story. Mm-hmm. So before you even do the story, I always say, don't feel you have to have someone in the game just for the sake. Say, hey, this is the game I want to play. This is the kind of story I want to tell, the theme. Are you guys interested? And you'll find if people are 100% sold on it, you'll have a much better time. I've learned that the hard way, When it comes to being a player, to take what Paul said, come up with the person first before you pick like the clans and the stats and all that stuff, like with the core concept, because that's what all these games are kind of built upon. You're playing characters that were normal people at one point or another in their life, and when you really get down and you expand into that, it makes the story like so much better. Like one thing that I tested in one of the games that we did, Wars on Fire, was where the players made their human characters first. And then they randomly rolled dice to see what clan they were. And there's a story to back that up, and they had to and I found that game's very character driven now. These people have characters. Like right now I'm working on where one of our players is going to be running a game on our channel, Changing the Lost game. And I'm like hashing out just the normal human details about a guy who, I'm not going to get into the weeds, but just a mortal character living in 1990s Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we're just banging back and forth ideas and just, and chat and everything like that. So yeah, just remember that. And the more you're vested in that character, the more return you're going to get in the game. That's how I view it.
Yeah, backstories are definitely not optional.
Yeah. I'm a dark, mysterious hitchhiker that walks down the street. That's not going to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's great. You guys have got me all jazzed. I wish I was playing this right now. Thank you so much for talking with me about this. Before we go, I know we're running short on time. There is one other thing I want to talk about, which is Kenneth Haidt is one of my favorite game designers. He has designed several horror-themed games, probably the most notable of which is called Night's Black Agents. It uses the Gumshoe system. It's from Pelgrane Press, in which you are super spies fighting vampires. He describes it as Jason Bourne versus Dracula.
I'm so into this.
That sounds great.
And it is a really fun game. Really, really fun. Takes place in the quote unquote real world, if there were vampires in the real world. I won't get too into the weeds with this, but he's a big history buff. I believe he has his master's in history. Has a real passion for it. Talks about it all the time with Robin D. Laws, another great game designer, on the Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff podcast, which just won its 4th gold Emmy.
Wow!
So yeah, it's he's an amazing person, great designer, and he is designing the next edition of Vampire. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. I'm not sure if any of you are in the playtest or made it to Gen Con or have heard Gen Con news. Sort of what are you thinking about this new edition? And why don't we start with you, Sage, because you said you had heard a little bit of news coming out of Gen Con for it.
Yeah, I'm so sad that I was not able to go to Gen Con this year. But reading the article about one of the GMs who did 5 different playtests with the new vampire system, and what I really appreciate and what he said is that the idea, because you're a vampire, you are a bloodthirsty creature who has to feed off of human blood all the time. And what I appreciate, what I'm most excited for this is that, that hunger is really kind of one of the focal points that, you are constantly battling against this. And I believe that in that he said, it makes for a really interesting, role-playing opportunities for very interesting character drama and tension, and also has a mechanical effect in the game too. I'm such a history buff myself. Like when I plan a world or can plan a character, I'm like, it's like I'm writing a master's thesis. when they release that, they're going to release the rules for the playtesting online soon. And I'm very excited to get my hands on that.
And after this podcast, remind me to geek out with you about the Dracula dossier for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
What about you, Paul? Have you heard anything about the new game? Have you checked anything out?
Yeah, I think Sage and I read the same article about the Gen Con playtesting. Yeah, I'm really excited about the way they've altered some of the mechanics around. It sounds like they've previously in Vampire, they had what was called the blood point system. So essentially how full your vampire was, how recently they'd ate and things like that. And depending on how full their tummy was how bestial they could act or how close they were to going into a frenzy or something. And so they've really sort of simplified and done away with that with this hunger mechanic and utilizing dice and simplifying it so it's not just a matter of boxes that you have filled in that represent the bestial undead hunger that your vampire feels. So it seems a lot more organic and really interactive as a player. And then, yeah, I'm really excited to see what the playtest rules, the full playtest rules look like and to play around with it myself.
And Chris, finally, do you have any thoughts about the new edition coming out?
Yeah, I actually got invited to ST at Gen Con, and I originally committed to it. Yeah, and then I forgot my wife's birthday was the same week, and so I kind of did the right husband thing. So I committed without realizing. I'm glad I didn't buy a plane ticket like I almost did. I had a couple friends who went out there who did it. I love it. I absolutely love what I'm hearing about it. The reason why I love it is not only because what has already been stated about the hunger system and like them changing the rules, because the rules have pretty much kind of been the same from like all versions of Vampire the Masquerade in one form or another, but also like the meta plot. They're really getting back to the core first edition personal horror aspect, and they're kind of taking like the big picture story, like the Sabbat, which are like a group of antagonists. They're just saying, oh well, they're in the Middle East now, and then they're saying, oh, and a lot of powerful Camarilla vampires, which are like the other sect, are following them. And we don't really care about them. We're not going to be releasing any books about them anytime soon. But right now, what we're concerned about is more Camarilla in the city and these vampires they call anarchs who just don't want to follow their rules. And that's very street level. And that's what first edition really was all about. So I'm digging it, man. I'm like really excited. Take my money and just
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a really good, like really personal drama driven, like very like gritty game.
Yeah, it's very refreshing in a way for being gritty, right? It's really refreshing because it's like they're starting. It's almost like they did with Vampire Requiem, but they're keeping it in the meta plot storyline of Vampire the Masquerade. They're just trimming it down, and I love it.
Well, thank you all so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble today. Before we go, where can people find you, Sage?
All right, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram at Staff of Sage, and also to make like a semi-announcement, I'm speaking of World of Darkness games, I'm actually I'm like knee-deep in planning on working on creating a Werewolf the Apocalypse podcast.
What?
So that would be a thing to look out for in the future. Yeah.
Nice. That's excellent. And Paul, where can people find you?
I am on Twitter at Paul_Harpring.
Excellent. And, of course, they can tune in to previous episodes of the Venture Maidens as well.
Of course.
Check you out. And where can people find you, Chris?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at twin_cities_VTM. You can find us on YouTube, Twin Cities by Night, if you want to see my ugly mug while we play games. But we also have a podcast version, which you can find on iTunes, SoundCloud. Just search for Twin Cities by Night. And then also, if that Facebook group I run for people who are sharing their White Wolf content, or if you want to see White Wolf content, check out White Wolf RPG Gameplay and Media. We have tons of stuff up there that's getting posted daily, people sharing gameplay, sharing articles, and we'd love to see more people there. So
it definitely is. It's a really fabulous resource. I definitely have started wandering through the all the posts and everything, and it's amazing how prolific all these content creators are. It's very cool.
And that's one thing, just before we leave, that's one thing I respect about D&D. Their content creators seemed organized, and that's what my goal was about that. So that's awesome. So thank you for saying that.
Totally. And I just wanted, because I make a lot of things for Wizards of the Coast, wanted to clear up that I like D&D.
Oh yeah, we're all.
Yeah. As a 5th ed player, I love D&D, but I love other things too.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not pretentious vampire players like with their nose in the air. Don't worry about that. No. We have our half-orc barbarians too, trust me.
That's right.
Dude, my barbarian is one of my favorite characters. I love her to death.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. And this was great. Let's go play some White Wolf games.
Woo.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Before we get to my conversation with Jason, I just wanted to tell you about one of the sponsors for this podcast, Kobold Press. Thank you so much for sponsoring this episode of Tabletop Babble and all of the great DSPN shows. You know, Kobold Press has a lot of awesome stuff. The Midgard campaign setting is amazing. They've got the Tome of Beasts, which is awesome. But one of my favorite products is Prepared, and now Prepared 2. What are those books? Well, they're books that have a bunch of 5th edition D&D one-shot adventures ready to go. You need very little to no prep for each one. They take about a session or two, and they're great for when your players do something crazy and go totally off the map. Bam, you can hit them with Prepared. Everything from Icebound Horrors to a Dragon's Lair to a Goblin War Wagon is involved. It's all created by amazing game designer John Sawatsky. There's amazing art and maps within these things. You have to check out Prepared and Prepared 2. I am so glad I have both. I go into every game without fear because now I am ready to handle everything. Thank you so much to Kobold Press. You guys should get your copy of Prepared 2 at the Kobold Press store today or wherever great adventures are sold. All right, here's my interview with Jason Nelson. Okay, everybody, now I am here with a legendary game designer. No pun intended, the one and only Jason Nelson. Thank you so much for joining me on Tabletop Babble today. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
My name is Jason Nelson Doucette. I've been working professionally in the field for about 15 years. I started off working freelance for Wizards of the Coast, mostly stuff for their website, and did that for about 5 years. I've done about 60 or 70 books for Paizo. And back in 2011, I set up with a team of guys, Legendary Games. So we got organized by Clark Peterson of Necromancer Games, and that was me, Neil Spicer, Quentin Boomer, Greg Vaughn, and we came together to form our own kind of third-party group, mostly at that time focusing on Paizo's Pathfinder Venture Path. We were all regular freelancers with Paizo, and so we figured, hey, who better to know how to make extra great, terrific products to go along with their APs than people who are already working on all their stuff. So that's how Legendary was born, and it was born with an idea of we want to create premium, high quality, this fantastic looking, playing, feeling set of third-party stuff using the same authors that are already making the official stuff that you're using with terrific production value, stuff that'll be as beautiful to look at and as fun to read as it is dynamic and, enjoyable to use at the table. And, that there's all kinds of game companies out there, and that was the direction we chose to go, and it's done just fine. I've been working full-time, running Legendary Games for the last about 3.5 years or so. This is my full-time career now. So I've done lots of stuff for D&D, for Pathfinder, and now for Starfinder. We've done a few things for other game systems here and there, but that's kind of been our core audience. We've broadened out. We've got almost 400 products out for Pathfinder, and
wow,
60 or 70 or so. Last year, I think we did 153 products.
Wow.
2016, which maybe that was too many, but
That's more than a product every 3 days.
Yeah, it was a little crazy. But you know what? Hey, if there's people out there who want to buy, then by God, we will give them stuff that's awesome and terrific. And that's part of our company mantra. Number one, we create what we want, when we want, how we want, because we believe that getting talented people working on products they're passionate about doing and just supporting them and having them work together in a collaborative way, that's how you get great stuff. And our second company principle is always be awesome.
Well, I think you achieved both of those principles. I own several Legendary Games products, and I've never been disappointed, always been wowed, and that's hard to do because I expect a lot from you guys now. So it's pretty awesome, the things that you are putting out. I want to talk to you, before we jump into what your latest product is, let's talk a little bit about Starfinder. So Starfinder is the Pathfinder sci-fi equivalent from Paizo that came out this year at Gen Con. Did gangbusters, sold out like the first day of Gen Con. They didn't have any copies left. People seem to really like it. I'm wondering, what do you think about Starfinder, and what do you like about it so much? It's clear that you have a love for it since you've already dived in and started creating products for it.
It's interesting to me just as a longtime gamer, and that I started gaming in 1981, so not as far back as some people, but pretty far back. And I've seen a lot of sci-fi systems come and go, and sci-fi's always been kind of the stepchild in the role-playing game mix. For whatever reason, it's never really caught on and stayed on. There have been systems. I used to love playing games like Gamma World, Star Frontiers, stuff like that. But while you've had games like Travel around since the beginning, and it had a strong niche audience, it just never quite seemed to transcend up to I don't know what you call an industry leader sort of point. You had games that would pop briefly, like West End Star Wars, or when Star Frontiers got its first big push, or here and there you get games that would blip, but then they would fade. Alternity had a brief surge and kind of faded back out again. And so this is the first time in a long time that kind of one of the industry-winning companies has really taken the bull by the horns of sci-fi RPGs and really pushed it hard. And Paizo sort of set up some of the track for the railroad of this with some of the stuff they've done in the last couple of years with introducing technology, with things like the Iron God, Adventure Path, and the Technology Guide. And they saw that things were going along pretty well. And for that matter, our Legendary Planet sort of sci-fi fantasy adventure path Kickstarter, which did very well about 2-3 years ago. And then our partners at Encounter Table Publishing, their Etheric campaign setting Kickstarter, they could see, even in the third-party space, there was definitely a hunger for more sci-fi games. And they're not the only ones who are out there. You'll notice if you look at sales numbers now for Star Trek games doing well, BattleTech's kind of making another comeback. So it could be part of the collective zeitgeist. But they also sort of saw what was going out there and said, let's take this and give it a real hard push and run with it and see how far we could go. And Paizo has a good advantage in the setup of their organized play system, so they were able to get a lot of people kind of on the track right away, from the jump, both at Gen Con and in general with not just kind of their core releases, but also their Starfinder Society offering. So they were uniquely situated in terms of the way they'd set up their business model to really have a good go at making sci-fi, adventure work. And so, as far as the system goes, there's a lot to like about it. It's similar in a lot of ways to Pathfinder. There are key differences in just the way it plays. There are elements from other games. In going through the playtest cycles early, there were even some parts that felt, like different iterations of, Pathfinder and D&D like games. There was some stuff that was very 3rd edition. There were a few elements that were even kind of 4th edition style. There was some stuff that was slimmed down and lightened from, the Pathfinder, core codex. And some of that's unavoidable. It's a new system, and so you can pair off a lot of stuff that you are not trying to inherit as a legacy. So Starfinder is able to kind of launch with that as a base, but without necessarily having the same concerns of backwards compatibility that Pathfinder had at its outset. And so there are parts of it to like, and well, it really depends on your taste as to what you like versus what you don't like in terms of the feel and the flow of combat. It's a little more ranged combat heavy, though melee does still play a part. Things like grappling and combat maneuvers are very different in Starfinder. A lot of stuff has been simplified, opportunity attacks, things like that. And so the flow of it's just a little different, and the feel of it is different. But I guess it's too early to say, given the relatively slim amount of release of the official codex of Starfinder. Say, well, was it Is it everything it's going to be? Well, shoot, it's a brand new game. It's only got a couple of books out. So anybody expecting it to suddenly have this enormous wealth of stuff out there is barking up the wrong tree. It's interesting to talk about the expectations people have for Starfinder in both in terms of what they wanted in gameplay and also what they wanted in terms of other support products. And this is interesting to me because a lot of people in the run-up to it, when we and other companies surveyed fans, hey, what do you want? What are you interested in seeing for Starfinder? And the thing that most fans harped on was, we don't want to see lots of character options and things like that. We want to try out all the new classes and races in the Starfinder core book before we try doing a lot of other extra bonus classes and things. What we want are adventures, setting material, and that kind of stuff. Now, that's funny because then, right when Starfinder dropped, a lot of companies like us had early access to it, so we were able to get a lot of products ready to go in the pipe. We came out with a lot of adventures and setting material. But what was the best-selling product for Starfinder? It's the Starfarer's Companion from Rogue Genius, which is taking a bunch of Pathfinder classes and races and converting them for Starfinder. The irony of, well, we don't want all that stuff. But as soon as it comes out and available, a lot of people said, oh, yes. They kind of ran right back to customers. Like, yes, we actually did want that.
Yes, yeah. Well, and one of the things that's great about bestiaries, and we'll definitely get into this more when we talk about the amazing thing you're creating, is that they tend not to have the same effect that a whole bunch of player supplements have on the game as far as things like power creep go and that sort of thing. It's just like, hey, here's a whole book of stuff my players don't know about that I can drop onto them. And it's incredible.
That was kind of where one of the things we came in with. Obviously, I talked about Legendary Planet. One of our first thrust that we wanted to go with was we ran Kickstarter maybe 2 years ago, and 2015, and it was a massive adventure saga, kind of going from first to 20th level, and it was a particular kind of sci-fi. It was more what you might call planetary romance, or Sword and Planet. It's much more in the vein of, say, John Carter of Mars meets Thundar the Barbarian out in the Mos Eisley Cantina, or the grungy outer rim of Star Wars. It was not focused on spaceships and the sort of high mechanical side, but it was more focused on aliens and exotic worlds and mysterious ancient technology, and that sort of a feel of adventure. And also a lot of fun to Stargate, and that was the primary method of getting from one planet to another through this portal network. And so we created this adventure path originally for Pathfinder and 5th edition, long before Starfinder was a thing. Now, of course, when Starfinder was announced, like, okay, well, let's go and see what we can do with that. And so we kind of then went back to Legendary Planet and broadened it out and brought on Liz Waddell, who did the editing on the Starfinder core rulebook and on the Alien Archive and much of that other stuff. As I said, we always try to work with the very best people and the people who are in the best position to know what's the best stuff to do. And so somebody who is an expert on Starfinder, it's like, shoot, that's who I want to have on board working with me and helping coordinate our Starfinder plan. So I say all that about Legendary Planet, not just because it's an amazing adventure path that I've run pieces of multiple times. Everyone's always had a blast with. I'm actually running it in 2 separate home campaigns. But on top of that, in the creation of Legendary Planet, we started building out this whole universe of alien planets and new worlds and creatures. And so we had a ton of great new sci-fi themed monsters and artwork. And I mentioned also earlier the Etheria campaign setting, Robert Brooks and his guys and Countertable Publishing, which we have co-published the Etheria campaign setting with them. And they had likewise created this fantastic new space sci-fi setting with the twinges of sort of a steampunk, Art Deco, noir, and cosmic horror all blended together. And so between the two of us, we had a lot of great monsters and a lot of great artwork. And it's like, you know what? This seems like an opportune moment because we're well positioned. We've got all the people already working on this. We've already done a ton of these monsters for 5th edition and an ever-growing, I think we've got about 150 or so sort of sci-fi and space-themed 5e monsters already, plus another 60, 70, 80 or so for Starfinder. When we started this project, and we already had a whole team of people underway and working on this, thought, you know what? this is a place where there's clearly an interest and an appetite for more sci-fi and space gaming. So you know what? This is a great moment. This is what we should be doing. Got the stuff already. Let's make it happen. So thus was born the Alien Bestiary.
Yes.
So that's it. And we're running the Alien Bestiary Kickstarter right now. We've got funding already, about 10 days in or so.
Congratulations.
And I literally, minutes before I got on the line with you, I was just finishing up a whole new set of new bonus goals, because having double our funding goal, we actually have opened up a second book, the Alien Codex. I'll talk about that in a minute, too. We have yet a third book coming up soon, the Ethera Field Guide. And so these are ones to be able to kind of build out a massive resource and encyclopedia of creatures and NPCs and everything for use in your sci-fi or space campaign.
Right, and not just Starfinder, right? We've got 5e, we've got Pathfinder, and we've got Starfinder. So, like, if people are checking out Espergenesis, which is a 5e hack in a space world that people have just released, you could do that. If you're playing one of Mike Myler's many settings in Pathfinder, if you're doing a hypercore thing, you could use some aliens there. This is pretty awesome.
Yep, and Hypercore also available for 5e, too. And the $29.99 Wasteland for 5e. As funny for the story, Espergenesis, they were our booth mates at Gen Con. So got to hang out with those guys. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, our original idea was to make this for Starfinder 5th edition. But as soon as we opened up the project, people said, hey, wait a minute. Why not a Pathfinder version? And our original reason for that was simple, that a lot of the creatures that we were creating for Starfinder and 5e were ones that already existed in Pathfinder. So I thought, well, I mean, technically, it's all OGL. We could make a big book of tons of Pathfinder monsters that already exist in other books, but that's not necessarily the Legendary Game style, just to do a reprint book. But fans were interested, so we kind of surveyed people from previous Kickstarters and our current fans, and so what we ended up coming up with was basically a compromise solution. So the Alien Bestiary Companion for Pathfinder, which will have all of our new monsters, plus one of the fun things in this Kickstarter is the fans, the backers, get to vote on which monsters get to be in the book. We've got a ton of them that we're putting in, but each time we open up a new pledge level that we hit to, we've done, then we'll post up a list of 15 or 20 monsters, and the fans get to vote. The top 5 vote getters, those will all be in the book for sure. Some of the others on the list might end up in there as we kind of balance out creature types and power levels, but first one was for Cosmic Constructs, and so the Terraformer robot is clear number 1 in that, but the Annihilator robot is also there, as is the Crystal Golem and the Clockwork Mage and the Clockwork Leviathan. Those are the top 5 vote getters on there. We opened up Alien Animals, and the Tyrannosaurus was number 1. And the next one is Planetary Plants. So if you want to vote for the shambling mound of a Tendriculus or whatever disgusting, horrible fungus creature, you want to come in there and make sure it gets in the book. If you're a backer, from $1 to $1,000 at any point in between, you get a vote on that, and you get to help decide what monsters to be in there. So for the Pathfinder version, we'll have all the new monsters, any new monster we create throughout the project, and monsters people vote on. But we're not just going to completely gather up and reprint a whole bunch of monsters from everywhere. So the Pathfinder book will be smaller, but 5e and the Starfinder versions, they'll have these robustly created creatures, and not just a what you might call, a straight one-to-one conversion. The whole idea is we've got a team of over 30 people who are working, people who are experienced at the whole idea of conversion and recreation, and it's not to convert a creature straight across. Anybody can kind of push something through a sifter and see what comes out the other side, but it's to recreate a monster that evokes all the best parts of the original in a way that makes sense for the new system. So when you're going to get a 5e monster, it will read like and play like a 5e monster. If you're getting a Starfinder monster, similar but not identical to Pathfinder monsters. So all of those things, the Alien Bestiary is already well over 200 pages. It's pushing up, close on. It'll be, I imagine, over 300 pages by the time we're done with this. Very similar in size to a typical Pathfinder Bestiary. But it's monsters, templates, creatures from space, dragons. We've got some terrific artwork up on our website. The horrific, chitons of the etheric campaign setting, and also playable race creatures dropped in there as well. which then brings us to the Alien Codex, which takes a slightly different tack on the whole monster idea. So if you're familiar with the Pathfinder Monster Codex, the Alien Codex is much the same kind of idea. You'll have on each race or a group of races will have a section. In that section, you'll have essentially a whole bunch of stock NPCs of that race. So if you've got one on humans, there may be human gutter rats and guardsmen and sharpshooters. You may have Null commandos. You may have Octane cyborg, space Nazi Oberführers. Whatever the particular thing that race is, you'll have a whole series of ready-to-use, ready-to-drop-in stat blocks from low power to high power. It's actually a monster manual of pre-made NPCs set up in each of those races, plus some special race-specific content for each one of those, plus a whole section of very detailed iconic heroes of both kind of legacy races like humans and dwarves and elves and things, as well as alien races from some of those from the Starfighter world, some of those from the Legendary Planet world, some of those from the Ethera world. As we go through, we'll be adding more and more and more alien races to it. The Alien Codex starts out around 100 to 120 pages or so of content, and again, continues to build up as we hit more stretch goals. You get more alien races, more NPCs, more iconic heroes. And the iconic heroes not only have rich and detailed backstories, histories, personalities, but also have multiple stat blocks showing them evolving over a series of several different levels. I think the 2nd, 5th, and 8th. I'd have to go back and look to check for sure. But so you could drop these in as recurring characters in the campaign. So that's the Alien Codex that just unlocked today, or I guess overnight, and I've posted up another of brand new pledge goals related to that. The final third book is the Ethera Field Guide. Now, if you're familiar with the Ethera campaign setting, it's almost 600 pages of incredibly rich, detailed, and vivid campaign setting material. Mechanically, it's for Pathfinder, but out of that 580-some pages, about 130 or so are mechanics. The rest of it, 450 pages or so, is all just incredibly detailed and evocative and different space, sci-fi, fantasy setting. Like I said, with elements of noir and horror mixed into it. And it's a fantastic book. If you haven't gotten it, go get it. But the Ethera Field Guide takes that Ethera campaign setting and kind of brings that to a more general audience. There is stuff that is still embedded deeply within Ethera specifically, but it's a monster book almost in the vein of a naturalist book. Kind of like, almost like a book of layers type of book where you've got ecologies for different kinds of alien creatures. You've got variant forms of different alien creatures. So rather than variant, like the Alien Codex, you'll have a variety of NPCs of particular alien races. In this, you'll have variant types of alien creatures and their environment. How do they live? What do they eat? What do you do with their dead bodies after you killed them? Much from that perspective, you've got 3 different kinds of terrific toolboxes. Alien Bestiary is just monster. Tons of great templates, races, what have you. Go with the Alien Codex. You've got alien people, NPCs covering all kinds of careers, all kinds of bases. So if you need, people from sewer rats that are literal rat people to highfalutin, interplanetary diplomats, you've got all the stat blocks right there. And plus, you've got these vividly detailed, iconic characters you could drop in. Rivals, allies, cohorts, and hench people, ship crews from other ships, however you want to use them, they're there for characters that you actually need with some more staying power and personality, plus the ones that are just up there to be, cannon fodder or enemies or each of drop into your campaign. Then the Ethera Field Guide, which comes up to 30,000, that one will be unlocking soon, and that one is more just an in-depth look at the ecology of extraterrestrials.
Okay, that's awesome. Pretty incredible set of stuff that you've got there. And one huge thing I think you could say to most people who are into fantasy, you see an orc and they know what that means, even if they've never read a monster manual, right? Or a bestiary. They're like, okay, I get it. I know what an orc is. I know what they do. Aliens, one of the great things about aliens is they are alien by definition, right? We don't know what they are. We don't know how they work. You have, just looking at your Kickstarter page, looking at the amazing art you've got going, you've got a wide swath of creatures. And you've already mentioned some, everything from space dragons to sewer rat people to some more traditional big-brained looking aliens to some weird Cthulhu-esque type stuff. Like, it's all in there. How much fun do you have coming up with this stuff, and how much of it is inspired by some other piece of fiction, and how much of it is, straight from the brains of the designers?
Number one, it's a ton of fun, and really working with the artists is one of the fun parts of the job, too. I work with artists all over the world, so I'm getting emails at any time of day or night from someone from Thailand to Australia to England to Germany to Russia to Argentina to wherever. They're all over the place. And so working with artists and getting the different interpretations and also matching up the artist's various styles with the different kinds of creatures. There are some creatures where someone with a more almost impressionistic, just bizarro horror take, it works terrific. There are some you want something a little more high fantasy and a little more, clear and straight line. So being able to kind of juggle that to make sure you get a really neat combination of different kind of artworks in there, that's a lot of fun. But we've got a terrific team. Like I said, over 30 people who are working on it right now, plus the guys who've originally come up with some of these monsters before. It's been a lot of fun working with them and seeing what they bring to the table. We will have some brand new monsters in here. Every contributor has their own kind of a golden ticket monster if they want to bring something in there and they want to add to the book. Those will all be brand new. So, and that's also something that fans can't do. And we've had people do this a lot in previous Kickstarters where they will sponsor their own monster, sponsor their own character. There are extra kind of sponsor levels where you can basically spend a little extra money. So instead of waiting for some creature to get voted in, you say, no, here's the monster I want in, here's my money, that monster goes in the book. And we say, yep, there it goes. Here's the fabulous artwork we just made for it. Your monster's in the book. You're with the sponsor in that monster. You've got a character. You want them to show up in the Alien Codex. Say, hey, here's my character. This character's now going to be one of the iconics in your book. Give us that money, and we happily accept that. It's like, you know what? I'm all for it. Your character's now in here. Everybody's going to murder your character from now on. Your character is the stock merchant prince of the whatever your character is. Mm-hmm. Hey, want your character immortalized and beautified? Hey, bring it on. We just recently released out to backers the PDF for our Forest Kingdom campaign compendium, which is much more straight up high fantasy wilderness adventure, forest, bay, and royal tournaments and exploration and that kind of thing. Hardback book for Pathfinder and 5e, ended up almost over 424 pages. And one of the things people were able to do is they could join the royal court of the forest. They would get to design their own coat of arms or a royal flag. They'd have a portrait of their character. They could describe what their kingdom was like. And so there's a whole chapter in that book devoted to those kind of characters and their countries. And people had a blast with that. And that's something you could do right here as well. If you want to invent your own brand new monster that doesn't exist anywhere, I want to make up my own monster. It came from outer space. That is a pledge level you could do. Not a published monster, but your very own creation. You work with our designers. We create a monster that is entirely yours. We curate, make a fabulous artwork for it, which you'll get as well. If you want to personalize your experience with Kickstarter, that's part of the fun of doing this. So that it's not just, hey, I go to the store and I bought a book. You actually can help make this book be what it is. If you're at kind of a more surface level, it's kind of, hey, you vote for the monster to come up, but you can get right involved. You want to put your name on something. We have a level called space graffiti. Basically, you're going to name a person, place, or thing somewhere in one of these books. So if you want to name it after, yourself, your character, your wife, your dog, your kid, go for it. We had a guy actually in the Forest Kingdom book again. Very touching. He put in a tribute to his deceased father, and he sent me an email afterwards saying, I was so touched. You made me cry. It came out so beautiful the way you wrote it. Thank you so much for doing it. I said, hey, it's our pleasure, and I think it was a fabulous tribute. And so these are all options. That's part of this process. It's meant to be interactive, and so if you're interested in personalizing your experience and making this book and getting yourself, put in there for everyone to see, then, God bless you, come on with it.
That's such an amazing opportunity to have, and some real fun to be had in what is sure to be a great product because of your proven record at Legendary Games, and so much fun to talk about aliens and imagining aliens and all of the horrible ways they can murder us and we can murder them, and the weird friendly aliens you can meet. It just seems like such a great thing, and it seems like such a great thing too. If you are running a Star Trek or a Star Wars game, just to have the inspiration there for these creatures. You might not have the exact stats you need for the game, but if you've got people exploring galaxies, this is the way to go. Why do you think that there has been such a sci-fi boom recently in the world of role-playing games? You were talking earlier about sort of identifying that trend and being able to jump on the bestiary and give people what they want. What is the motivation for many gamers to finally get on board with some fantastic sci-fi gaming? Because this is something I have wanted forever. And you're right, it seems like sci-fi comes and goes, but this time feels a little different because so many people are on board.
That's an excellent question. I don't have a great answer for why the zeitgeist is right there. You could say maybe it's a turning of the tide. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, more core fantasy was really booming. Some of that was due to like the Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings movies, and their host of imitators that came up in their wake. Whereas now maybe that pop culture pendulum has swung a little bit more towards superheroes and sci-fi, and so maybe there's a little bit more hunger in the common culture for that. And maybe again, it's a hunger that's always been there. It just has never really been satisfied in a deep way. I think that the teasers and the rollouts for Starfighter were expertly handled. So I think some of that is marketing in it, and marketing can make a big difference. If you think back to the advent of 4th edition, the system itself, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but a lot of people at the time that it was rolled out were really, I would say, hurt and offended by the way the game was marketed. It was put forward as a game that, this is our new game, it's going to be awesome, and if you like our old game, you're stupid because our old game is crap, stop playing it, only play the new game. And good, bad, or otherwise, the way that public relations side of the 4th edition D&D rollout was handled, that soured a lot of people on the experience and really, drove a certain wedge into the market, which ended up giving birth, ironically, to Pathfinder. So that kind of social and public, facing, handling of it, can make a big difference. And I think in this case, Paizo handled it really well in how they doled out the teases, how they set up, the whetting the appetite, priming the pump, so that people could see not just, hey, we're going to do a space game, but hey, we're really devoting serious resources to it, and we're engaging with the third-party people right at the get-go. So not just our official stuff, but a ton of great third-party stuff will be available at the same time. So you'll be able to be out there and get the stuff right there. And I think that people seeing products come to fruition that were very cool, and I'll say again, Legendary Planet and Ethereum succeeding a couple of years ago, and the Iron Gods, Adventure Path before that, I think made people say, hey, this is something we haven't really done, but we kind of like it. And so people had gotten a taste of it, so it didn't just sort of drop out of the sky and said, hey, try this new game. And it wasn't purely a nostalgia ploy either, but it grew fairly organically, and I think that, some of that you could attribute to good fortune, but some of that I attribute to good planning. So the books were set up well, they rolled out well, the quality was terrific, the engagement with fans and the engagement with other companies was terrific. You had a ton of third-party support that was ready to drop right away. I mean, we had our first, installment of the Legendary Planet Adventure Path was ready to go on the first day at Gen Con. And, people responded very well to that. We created a whole series of legendary worlds, ready to drop in planets with, history, culture, geography, new monsters, new rules, elements, adventure hooks for why you go there. We've got a whole series of those that have already been coming out for Starfinder and for Pathfinder and for 5th edition. So there was a wave that was built, and then once it broke, it was ready to break. And it broke hard, it broke big. So those would be my guesses. We'll see if it ends up having staying power. And maybe that a year from now, people say, okay, we had our flirtation with sci-fi, now we want to go back to fantasy. Or it may be, hey, this is great, well, let's keep doing that. And that's kind of always been the trick with any kind of sci-fi game, is that staying power. You've got properties that have hung around a long time, like Traveler, or that have resurfaced again and again, like Star Wars or Starfleet Battles or Battletech or Gamma World. They kind of come and go, but there's no way to tell but to see what happens with Starfinder and how far it goes along.
No, you're absolutely right, and what you said about it being a new game is correct. I think that's a true thing, right? Like, I think a lot of times, if people don't need to learn an entirely new system, if they already have the basics for it, they're more willing to jump onto a game and devour the content of that game and everything, which is so excellent. And it's so excellent to see that somebody's already putting out more monsters. I want them. And it's great that we have them not just for Starfinder, not just for Pathfinder, but also for 5th edition D&D. What are some good ways you think people can play D&D 5e in space? I will put forth as a backer of the Legendary Planet Kickstarter that I think that is probably one of the best ways to do it. Is that's a great sword and planet adventure path for 5th edition that people can check out. And also for Pathfinder, if you're more of a Pathfinder person. So what do you think are some great ways people can bring 5th edition into space?
Part of the trick is that, space is big and sci-fi is big. And by big, I mean really varied. You've got a lot of different stuff. So you have something like Star Trek, which is like ultra high tech, down to something like, Firefly, that's pretty, low tech. Star Wars kind of in between. Is there hyperspace? Is there fast light travel? Is there teleportation? Is there matter replication? What is the tech level of space? What is the magic level of space? And Starfinder kind of bridged that gap a little bit by making magic still present, but a little less important relative to technology. It also alters the sort of the calculus of how the game works. I'll get to 5th edition in a second here, but I'm setting up for that. And by changing the way that equipment works. So in a typical game, something like poison gas or flying over a ravine, those are challenges of a certain level. But in a high-tech sort of situation, if you're wearing a powered spacesuit and a jetpack, then it's very easy to get from here to there and to not worry about the toxic atmosphere. And so the first question you have to ask as far as D&D goes is, how high-tech do you want your sci-fi to be? Because it can be very high-tech and it could be kind of medium-tech. You can play D&D with a laser guns where they just basically play the same role as a magic wand does. But how far out you want to go in terms of instantaneous communication, teleportation, flight, all of that, and whether that's kind of your first question. Second is, do you want to focus on the sci-fi genre or do you want to focus on spaceship battles? And that's always been kind of a tension in fantasy gaming because traditionally it's always been very character focused. So what are our 3, 4, 5, 6 characters doing at any given time? And so subsystems that have stepped away from that to do things like mass combat, or to do, you're leading a caravan and your characters do this, and then the caravan does that. If you're sailing a ship, what is the ship doing? On the ocean, you get attacked by pirates. Okay, here's your characters fighting the giant octopus. What are the rest of the pirates and the crew doing? And so you have to decide how much of that, metagame that you want to have with alternate subsystems where the characters are doing stuff that is not adventuring. And so that's just kind of a matter of personal taste. And you have to kind of decide how much of that you want to get involved in before you can decide how you want to deploy the 5th edition mechanics or any other game system mechanics in the setting. the basic fifth edition mechanics work just fine in a sci-fi setting. You just have to decide how relatively powerful technology is going to be and how much you want to genre switch. Because that's the third thing is, what is the feel of the adventure? Are you kicking down, the doors of space dungeons and taking the space monsters' space loot? Is it basically just translating the D&D experience onto the moon? Or are you changing the nature of what kind of adventure you're going on? Years ago, we used to play a Top Secret. Top Secret was a spy game created by Merle Rasmussen. Back in the day, we had all these different, TSR boxes, Gamma World, Blue Hill, Top Secret, and that sort of thing. Star Frontiers. And a lot of times, we would play Top Secret where you're playing spies and secret agents. And sometimes we play it kind of like D&D. It's like, okay, we broke into the evil mastermind's lair, but now we've got to find the ball because we need to find the money because we were trying to find the treasure in the adventure. But there wasn't supposed to be any treasure in the adventure. I mean, you could steal his jewelry if you wanted to, but that wasn't really the point of the adventure. And so you've got to kind of do some expectation and level setting and some conversation on a player-to-player level of your GM and your players. What kind of game do we want to play? Are we space explorers? Are we smugglers? Are we, Knights of the Old Republic? Are we agents of the Federation? What flavor of sci-fi are we trying to do here? And when you decide what flavor it is you're going for, that's when you can figure out how you want to apply the D&D rules. D&D rules are, especially 5th edition, are especially light and flexible enough that you can really do just about anything with them. If you want to add whole new character classes, new races, that's not that hard to do. Either once you can purchase online, obviously, you can create your own. We've got a lot of great stuff out there. Tons of. We just released a new book called The Treasury of the Machine, which is for 5th edition, which is 60 or 70 brand new technology out of all different kinds. So if you're looking to play a sci-fi game, check out The Treasury of the Machine from Legendary Games. It's available on our site, Drive-Thru, Paizo, Open Gaming Store. You can get it on Amazon. And so something like that can be your, gateway drug for introducing sci-fi into your campaign. And then you decide, do we want to keep it at Expedition to Barrier Peaks level, where we're still on a fantasy world, but hey, we have laser guns and robots? Or do we want to make that ship functional again, fly up into the stars, and go around and explore, in which case you might want some of our Legendary World series for 5th edition, where you've got space monsters and space societies and adventure hooks that are built around some more sci-fi narrative ideas about how and why and where you go adventuring. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. That was awesome. That's a really, really good answer. And I agree with every point about flexibility of the system, and really sci-fi means so many things just as fantasy means so many things. And you need to agree, what kind of game do you want to play, right? Just thinking about movies that count as sci-fi, right? Like Star Trek, Star Wars, Alien, all of those get the sci-fi tag, and all of those are very, very different stories and very different films. So I think that's an amazing way to put it. Jason, I know you've got to run, but before we go, where can people find you on the internet? And we should, of course, plug the Alien Bestiary, now on Kickstarter, already funded. Congratulations. And you can get more books out of this thing, more bang for your buck. If you go contribute right now. So where can people find you, Jason?
The best place to find us is at our website at makeyourgamelegendary.com. You can also hit us up if you ever have a question at makeyourgamelegendary@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at Make Your Game Legendary. You can find us on Twitter at Legendary Games J, on Google Plus at Legendary Games. You can find us on various message boards like EN World and Paizo message boards. Our current Kickstarter is set at the Alien Bestiary Kickstarter. We're actually double funded as of today, and still got about another 2.5 weeks left or so. It ends at the end of September. We are excited and delighted with how far it's gone so far. We would love to have more folks come on board. We're approaching 400 backers already. You can get folks in PDF or in print. Lovely, beautiful hardcover versions of it. And again, for 5th edition, you can get it for Starfighter, you can get it for Pathfinder. The Alien Bestiary is, core monster book. It's going to be probably around 300 pages or so. The Alien Codex will probably be somewhere around 250 pages or so, 200, 250. And that is mostly, ready to play. NPC character stat blocks for all kinds of roles, all kinds of levels, organized by the different alien races. So each race has got its own specialty, set of stat blocks, plus a whole raft of iconic heroes from your legacy fantasy races, plus your brand new alien races. Then the Ethera Field Guide, which is a more in-depth ecology of the space aliens of all kinds, set against the backdrop of the Ethera campaign setting. You can also do bonus add-on pledges. You can get a starter set of the Legendary Planet Adventure Path for any of the 3 systems at a special discount. You can get the Ethera campaign setting hardcover or PDF at a special discount. There's tons of great stuff. You can sponsor stuff to personalize book, get your very own monster, your very own character, put in there and immortalized in print with some amazing artwork. And just check us out. We would love to see you, even on many of our other projects. If you're interested in the Forest Kingdom campaign compendium, that it's going out to backers now, and it should be available in the next few weeks for people in general. So we've got literally hundreds of products out there for every kind of genre imaginable, not just sci-fi that we're focusing on at the moment, but classic, wilderness fantasy, from ancient Egypt to the frozen north of, fantasy Russia, from pirate adventures to demon-haunted, wastelands, all kinds of terrific stuff out there. And for Pathfinder 5th edition, and now for Starfinder, if you've got something you want to play, we've got an excellent chance of having something that's going to be right up your alley, including if you are interested in our Legendary Beginnings series, like the Trail of the Apprentice, for bringing new people into the hobby. It's a whole set of adventures specifically geared towards new players and younger players. I've used them with D&D summer camps that I've run at the local game store the last 2 years. Kids had such a great time the first year. A couple of them came back the second year because they wanted to see what happened next.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for everything you do for the gaming community, for all of the amazing products you make, and for joining me today on Tabletop Apple. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks for having me on, man. Have a great one.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tabletop Apple. It has been a blast. Before we go, I just want to remind you, Tabletop Apple is still a new show. We're less than a year old, and we could use your help growing. How can you do that? Head on over to iTunes, leave us a review. Even if you don't listen to the show through iTunes, a lot of podcatcher apps use the iTunes algorithm to recommend podcasts to other listeners. So you should head on over, make an account. It's totally free. Leave us a great review, and then reward all of the other great podcasts you love by leaving them a review. As a reward for your efforts, if you leave us a 5-star review, I will read it verbatim on air and credit you for leaving it. You can make me say anything you want. And this time, the person making me say anything they want me to say is Alpha Stream. Of course, the one and only Teos Abadia, friend of the show. This is making me very nervous. This review is entitled, One of the Top RPG Podcasts Ever. Oh, wow. All right. So off to a good start so far. Alpha Stream, Teos says, fantastic discussions about the RPG industry. James is an excellent host with an excellent team who works to better the industry by gathering top-notch guests with interesting and constructive takes on RPGs. From useful tips to insights on how the industry's underpinnings, don't miss this. Now, because James is always so effusive with his compliments and will read our reviews on this podcast, here's what James can read. Hi. I'm James, and I have a confession to make. I used to be a negative and hateful person. It's actually my true nature. Years ago, I crossed the Cholton witch, Nanny Poo Poo. She cursed me, forcing me to say nice things about everyone. The curse will be undone if my podcast doesn't get enough 5-star reviews. Now you know why I'm so nice, and why you must leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Well, Teos, you've cracked the code. People, if you want to keep me positive and upbeat, you need to go leave a 5-star review. Otherwise, the curse will be broken, and my true nature will come to bear. All right, everybody, you can find me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can check out all of the great work I am doing. That's right, it's great work, over at worldbuilderblog.com. me. And be sure to check out some of the other great shows on the Don't Split the Podcast network. We've got a lot of awesome stuff going on over there. Maybe you've heard of a little podcast called Dames and Dragons. If you haven't, or if you have and you haven't checked it out, go check them out. They are a delightful actual play filled with awesome jokes and amazing stories. So go check that out over at Don'tSplitThePodcastNetwork.com. You know, Tabletop Babble is a show on that very network, and thanks to Rudy Basso for founding DSPN with me. Remember that RPGs are like sex. You're going to want to introduce yourself before you get down to it with strangers. Hey everybody, just wanted to let you know about another sponsor for DSPN. I'm talking about Monte Cook Games. That's right, giants in the industry, Monte Cook Games, the creators of Numenera. You don't know about Numenera? Well, you should. I'm going to tell you about it, and then you're going to play it because it is an awesome game. Numenera is set 1 billion years in the future, where our technology is so great, it's almost become like magic. Numenera is set in the 9th world, where people are suffering through a dark age, an era of isolation and struggle in the shadow of ancient wonders crafted by civilizations millennia gone. It is incredible. It's so much fun. It's a great system for storytelling. Monte Cook is a genius, and if you have not played his games, you should. In fact, you probably have. He helped create a little thing called 3rd edition D&D and revitalized role-playing games. Now he's off making amazing things with the Cypher system. Numenera is one of them. Check it out. Numenera is launching 2 new core rulebooks. It's backwards compatible. It's not new rules for the game. You're not going to need to buy everything else. It's just more Numenera goodness. Numenera Discovery and Destiny. Gonna be on Kickstarter. Make sure you check it out. Discovery is a fresh take on the existing core rulebook. You'll get some revisions to make things clear and more fun, and increased options available for player characters. In Numenera Destiny, you'll get new things to do with your discoveries. That's right, I'm talking about new epic ways to structure your campaigns. I'm talking about new materials, power sources, and treasures. If you're not playing Numenera, now is a perfect time to jump on. Go check it out at mymcg.info/DST podcast. That's mymcg.info/DSTP podcast.